My name is Marielle Quinn, and the first time I was called useless, it wasn't in a fight. It wasn't even loud. It was said softly over tea and lemon cookies on a Sunday afternoon in our cramped, overheated kitchen, as if my worthlessness were just an accepted fact. Camilla's always had the mind for business, my mom told her sister, her voice light, almost cheerful. But Marielle? Sweet girl, but honestly, she was never built for success. I was 15, sitting 2 feet away, pretending not to hear. But I heard. I heard every syllable. I pressed my thumb into the edge of my book until the corner bent. I kept my head down, eyes locked on the words, but they blurred. My chest burned in a way I couldn't explain then. Part embarrassment, part betrayal, part something else I wouldn't understand for years. Dismissal. That was the real wound. Not that she thought I was incapable, but that she didn't even think I was worth defending. Camilla, my older sister by 2 years, smiled tightly across the table. She didn't correct Mom. Didn't even glance at me. Why would she? She was already the blueprint of perfection. Captain of the debate team. Straight-A student. CEO in the making, according to every adult who ever met her. I was the quiet one. The one who wrote stories no one read. The one who doodled on napkins, disappeared into books, and wore thrifted clothes that didn't quite fit. By senior year, Mom had stopped pretending. When Camilla got accepted into Stanford, we threw a backyard party with white tablecloths and floral centerpieces. When I got into the State University's creative business program, Mom blinked and said, "That's practical, I guess." I worked 2 jobs that summer to buy my own textbooks. My mom never offered. My sister never asked. And when I left home that fall, I didn't even get a ride to campus. But that was fine, because somewhere deep inside me, beneath all the hurt and silence, something was beginning to bloom. Not a desire to prove them wrong. A desire to become so unshakably right in who I was, that someday they'd have to walk through my door. Not as family, but as strangers in need. College wasn't glamorous. Not for someone like me. While Camilla posted pictures in front of Stanford's grand arches with iced lattes and Chanel flats, I was scraping together rent money in a shoebox apartment above a dry cleaner. I took early morning shifts at a bakery, then worked evenings at a front desk in a co-working space. In between, I studied not just coursework, but people. How they talked, how they moved, what they respected. I realized early, power wasn't always loud. Sometimes it wore glasses, sipped black coffee, and watched in silence. Being overlooked had become an advantage. No one guarded themselves around me. And I listened to everything. At the co-working space, founders came and went like changing weather, bright-eyed, hopeful, often lost. I watched 3 startups crash in 6 months because they didn't know how to scale. But one day, a woman named Celine burst in wearing a turtleneck, a messy bun, and an aura of clarity. She ran a boutique strategy agency that catered to underdog businesses. And she noticed me. "You always here?" she asked, halfway through her 2nd week. Mostly, I smiled, scanning the ID badge she dropped. "You've got a better retention rate than most." She raised an eyebrow. "What else do you notice?" That was how it started. Within weeks, I was helping her edit pitch decks and suggest layout changes. I'd stay after my shift, unpaid, just to sit in on meetings and absorb everything. Celine never pushed me. She just kept leaving the door open. By the end of the semester, she offered me a paid position. "You've got a strategist's mind," she said. "You just haven't had the right room to walk into yet." Those words landed like bricks in my chest. Not because I doubted them, but because they felt like the first real recognition I'd ever received. At home, no one asked about my work. Camilla was in finance, now some vague title at a sleek Manhattan firm. Mom gushed about her on every call, how Kim always knew what she wanted. Me? I stopped sharing, because I realized they didn't listen. And one day, when I'd have something worth showing, I wanted their silence to sting. The first time I pitched my own concept, my hands trembled under the table. Celine had sent me to cover a last-minute investor meetup. "Just observe," she said, handing me a sleek black folder. "And if you feel bold, mention your brand framework idea." My brand framework idea. Something I'd been sketching for months. A lean, story-driven branding model for small startups. One that didn't require a six-figure budget, just clarity and conviction. I hadn't shown it to anyone outside our agency. The room was packed with polished smiles and the scent of expensive cologne. I stood near the back, watching men twice my age toss around buzzwords like currency. They spoke in loops. Nothing stuck. And then someone asked the question no one else dared to. Okay, but how do you make a brand matter when no one knows who you are yet? I didn't raise my hand. I didn't even stand up. I just spoke. You don't make people care about your product. You make them care about the story behind it. That's how you earn attention. The room went still. A man near the front turned and asked, "And how would you do that?" My heart pounded in my throat. I stepped forward, pulled the folder from my bag, and opened it with trembling fingers. This is a framework I've been developing. It's called Root and Rise. You map your founder's story into 3 arcs: struggle, value, vision, and we use that to shape the brand's identity from the inside out. When I finished speaking, I was sweating through my blouse. But one of the investors leaned forward, curious. By the next week, we had 3 new clients. And that same week, Celine pulled me aside. "You're not just smart, Marielle. You're a builder. It's time we talk equity." For the first time, I was offered partnership. And still, I didn't tell my mother. Not because I wanted to keep her out, but because I wanted the world to tell her before I ever did. That night, as I walked back to my apartment, passing quiet bookstores and dim cafes, I realized something. The story I was writing with my life, the quiet grind, the late nights, the small wins. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was becoming the blueprint for something bigger. Something they could never see coming. 2 years passed like a whisper. The agency Celine and I built Root and Rise, went from a boutique operation to a sought-after name for ethical, story-first branding. We didn't chase Fortune 500 companies. We empowered the ones no one believed in, because I knew exactly what that felt like. But then, one afternoon, Camilla's name popped up in an email chain. I blinked, unsure at first. It was from a client who was transitioning away from their current consultant. They'd been working with a mid-sized firm on the East Coast, but the rep had overpromised and underdelivered. The feedback was scathing. Attached was the project brief. There, listed as the lead strategist, Camilla Quinn. I stared at her name for a full minute. It wasn't just a coincidence. She had entered my industry. My world. The one I'd built quietly from scratch. A few weeks later, I saw her name again, this time in a business article about firm layoffs. Something had gone wrong. Their department was restructuring. Titles were shifting. Camilla's profile on LinkedIn had gone dark. I didn't gloat. I didn't even tell Celine. But something in me clicked. She had been handed every advantage. And she was falling. I had been handed nothing. And I was still climbing. 2 months later, our firm was approached to host a private mentorship summit for women-led startups. It would be our biggest event yet, sponsored by several venture capital partners. Celine was set to open the keynote. I was to close it. The day of the summit, the event hall buzzed with energy. Floral centerpieces, velvet programs, branded notebooks, everything sharp, intentional. I wore a slate blue pantsuit and a calm I had never known before. Minutes before I went on stage, my assistant handed me a revised guest list. I skimmed through, half-focused, until I froze. Camilla Quinn, confirmed RSVP. She wasn't listed as a speaker. She wasn't representing anyone. She had registered as a guest. The words from my childhood echoed again. She was never built for success. And yet, there she was, walking into my summit. My company's logo behind every podium. My name on the banner. And still, I said nothing. Because I wanted her to feel it. Not my voice, but my presence. The one they all once dismissed. Now leading the room, they had to enter from the back. 3 weeks after the summit, I received a message I never saw coming. It was a standard inquiry through our careers inbox, the kind my assistant usually sorted. But this one had been flagged for my review. Subject: Executive Support Role, Application. Name: Colleen Quinn. My mother. My throat tightened. I read it twice, then again, staring at the words like they couldn't possibly be real. She had applied for a position. At my company. At the very company she once said I'd never be cut out for. The one she never acknowledged, never praised, never even asked about in the last 7 years. Attached was a short cover letter. After a long career break and some unexpected personal shifts, I'm hoping to return to the workforce. I'm impressed by Root and Rise's mission. I admire how it supports women building from the ground up. I blinked, stunned. She had no idea the company was mine. She had applied blindly, maybe through a friend's referral or a job board, and now her words were sitting in my inbox, typed with carefully measured humility. Humility I'd never seen from her before. I called Celine. I didn't know what to say. She picked up on the second ring. You okay? I told her everything. She didn't laugh. She didn't gloat. She just asked, do you want to move her forward in the process? I paused. For a moment, the version of me from years ago stirred, the girl who cried into library books and held her breath every time her mom picked Camilla first. But that girl wasn't in the room anymore. I want to interview her, I said calmly. Not to punish her, not to prove something, but because I needed to see the moment she realized. The office she was walking into? It bore my name. The daughter she had called useless now held the key to her next paycheck. The day of the interview arrived quietly. It was cloudy, warm, one of those strange, heavy mornings that makes the air feel thicker than usual. I wore a fitted charcoal blazer and tied my hair back, not for intimidation, but for clarity. At 10:58 a.m., she arrived. She didn't recognize the receptionist. She didn't know the woman escorting her down the hallway, nor the soft jazz playing in the background of our waiting room. She sat with her purse clutched tightly, her hair pulled back the same way she used to when she scolded me for not brushing mine. I watched from behind the frosted glass of the conference room, heart pounding. There she was, older, tired, more rigid than I remembered. The same hands that once pulled dinner plates from the oven now shook slightly as she flipped through her resume. When my assistant opened the door and said, "You can come in now," she stood with practiced grace, heels clicking softly on the wood floors. And then she saw me. Her body stopped mid-step. I didn't smile. "Mrs. Quinn," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Thank you for coming in." Her lips parted, just slightly, but no words came out. She blinked, recalibrated. "Saturday. You're interviewing me?" I nodded slowly. "Yes. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer here. This role would report directly to me." Silence. She stared at the table between us, then at me, then down again. I watched her fumble with her thoughts. I didn't realize. I let the silence stretch. Not cruelly, just long enough for her to feel the weight I'd carried for years. Then, gently, I said, "Tell me why you're interested in this role." Her eyes filled with something between pride and shame. I'm trying to start over," she said quietly. "Things didn't go the way I thought they would. Camilla moved to Europe, and after the layoff, I realized I needed structure again. Purpose. She didn't mention me. Not once. No acknowledgement. No apology. No memory of her words that burned themselves into my identity. And I wasn't about to beg for one. Instead, I asked 3 polite questions. Took notes. Maintained professionalism. At the end, she stood. Straightened her blazer. And just before she turned to go, she looked at me one last time. "You've done well for yourself," she said. It was almost a whisper. Better than I ever imagined. I nodded. But what I wanted to say was, exactly. We didn't hire her out of pity. Celine and I talked about it for hours, weighing the pros and cons like we would with any applicant. And ultimately, her resume held up. She had experience. She was professional in the interview. And ironically, she fit the role. A part-time coordinator for our operations team. Modest pay. Minimal visibility. Celine gave me the final call. "You sure you're okay with this?" she asked. "We can pass." No one would question it. But I didn't want to pass. I wanted to witness something no resume could reflect. Growth. Or the lack of it. "I'm sure," I told her. And so, my mother was hired. She started on a Monday. No big announcement. Just a new face in a smart blazer, escorted by HR, and shown to a desk tucked in the admin wing. The same wing I used to clean as an intern. The one where I organized cables and color-coded folders while she told people I'd never amount to anything. She didn't speak to me directly for the first 2 weeks. I passed her in the hall sometimes. She nodded once, looked down another time, but mostly she worked in quiet isolation. The staff treated her politely. They had no idea who she was. She went by Colleen and no one connected the dots. Until one Friday morning, I walked past her desk as she sorted team calendars. She didn't see me at first, but when she looked up, something flickered across her face. I waited, and finally she said it. "Do they all know?" "Know what?" I asked softly. "That I'm your mother." I held her gaze. "No," I said. "And they don't need to. Here, you're just Colleen." She nodded once, lips pressed tightly. I turned to leave. But before I did, I added, "That's how I survived this long. Being just Marielle." Her eyes didn't move. But I saw it. The regret. The confusion. The realization that her story wasn't the only one that mattered anymore. Because now, she worked in a space where her title meant nothing. And mine meant everything. I hadn't planned to make a statement that day. It was our quarterly company-wide meeting, a tradition Celine and I created when Root and Rise hit its first major revenue milestone. A space to celebrate wins, share new strategies, and remind everyone of the mission that built this place. That morning, the entire office buzzed with the usual excitement: boxed pastries, branded coffee mugs, and a slideshow prepped with soft jazz in the background. I wore navy blue, structured but graceful, and stepped onto the stage to applause I still wasn't used to. I glanced across the rows of chairs. She was there. My mother, sitting in the back, taking notes, looking at the floor. I began my speech. When we started this company, we weren't trying to disrupt an industry. We were trying to give voice to people who were told their stories didn't matter. People who were overlooked, underestimated, and told they didn't belong. Something shifted in the room. The silence deepened. This company was built by people who were once invisible. And now we help others be seen, not by changing who they are, but by showing the world what they were always capable of. I paused, looked up. Eyes met mine from the back of the room. Familiar. Hesitant. And this time, I didn't look away. To every person in this room who was ever told they weren't enough, you're not just welcome here. You're necessary. A ripple of applause. Heads nodded. And then something happened I didn't expect. My mother stood. Not to speak. Not to leave. Just to clap. Softly. Then a little louder. No one knew what it meant. But I did. She was acknowledging me. Publicly. Not as a daughter. But as a leader. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a hug. But in that one gesture, I saw something I had never been given. Respect. It was nearly 5 months since she joined. 5 months of polite nods, quiet presence, and invisible boundaries neither of us dared to cross. But that changed one evening as I packed my bag in the dim glow of my office, the building nearly empty. She knocked on the frame softly. "Do you have a moment?" she asked. I nodded, motioning to the chair across from my desk. She sat. Not rigidly, not defensively, just cautiously. Like she knew what she needed to say, but not how to start. "I didn't apply here to find you," she said, breaking the silence. If I had known, I probably wouldn't have. I folded my hands in my lap. "Why?" Her eyes dropped to her lap. "Because I was ashamed." She took a breath. I spent so many years believing success looked a certain way, loud, polished, predictable. Camilla fit that mold. You didn't. I didn't speak. I let her continue. "I used to tell myself I was preparing you for reality by being hard on you. But that wasn't it. I didn't understand you. And instead of trying, I diminished you." That landed hard. I wasn't expecting her to be that honest. "I used to think softness was weakness," she added, voice trembling. "But watching you here, the way people look at you, the way they believe in you, you lead with something I never taught you. Because you never let me," I said gently. She looked up, and for the first time in my life, I saw it. Not pride, not guilt, but grief. Grief for the daughter she didn't see. Grief for the years she couldn't get back. "I'm sorry," she said. Quiet but clear. Not performative. Not dramatic. Just human. I swallowed hard. I didn't need an apology, I said. But thank you for giving one anyway. We sat in silence for a while. Not the awkward kind. The healing kind. Then she stood to leave. But just before walking out, she turned back. You've built something extraordinary, Marielle. And I'm proud. Not because you proved me wrong, but because you never gave up on yourself. I didn't cry, but I felt something loosen inside me. Not all wounds need revenge. Some just need to be seen. 3 months after that conversation, my mother resigned. She didn't make a scene. She didn't even say goodbye in the traditional way. One Friday evening, HR forwarded me her formal exit notice. 2 weeks grace. Grateful for the opportunity. Wishing the company continued success. But on my desk the following Monday, tucked beneath a closed manila envelope, was something unexpected. A letter, written in her tidy, looping handwriting, the kind I remembered from childhood lunch notes, back when things were simpler. I hesitated before opening it. Marielle. I've rewritten this letter more times than I can admit, and no version ever seems enough. So I'll simply say what I know now and what I should have said a long time ago. You weren't the quiet one. You were the brave one. You weren't invisible. I just refused to look. You didn't change. I did. I came to root and rise needing work, but I left having witnessed what resilience truly looks like. And if nothing else, I hope you know I finally saw you, not as the daughter I misunderstood, but as the woman who built something extraordinary from nothing. I wish I had told you sooner. I wish I had believed in you then. But even if it took this long, I'm proud of who you are. Colleen. I sat there for a while, holding the letter in my lap. Not crying. Not bitter. Just still. Because this was the closure I didn't know I'd needed. Not vindication. Not revenge. But recognition. The kind that arrives quietly long after the pain, but just in time for peace. Later that month, I gave a keynote at a national entrepreneurship summit. Hundreds of people. Bright lights. Applause that echoed through glass walls and marble floors. I spoke about resilience. About underestimation. About the power of building when no one believes in you. And then, as the audience stood to applaud, I thought of that kitchen table. The lemon cookies. The careless words. The girl who wasn't built for success. She was gone. And in her place stood a woman who had never needed permission to rise. Only space. And now, finally, she had all of it.